a lot of the After Effects videos I make in the coming weeks are going to be kind of like this, just showing you shortcuts, a few tricks and tips and stuff like that. So what we can do is, if we've got this folder selected, there's nothing in at the moment, called comp.tut, and then we can click here, which is going to go create a new composition. We can also do Control N, and then you get the name of the composition. So I'll just call it plants because that's the sort of stuff we're going to put in here. Okay, so I'm going to do 3840 by 2160. I'll leave the background color as black. Okay, so with the composition, like say we've got our source here. So I've got a buttercup here. These are all CC0 images, and so that means I can use them. And basically, they're Creative Commons 0 that I found on Wikipedia, and I searched for them. Now what we can do is, if we do Control, we've got the image selected here. If we press Control and slash, it's actually going to put the image directly into the middle there. So I'm going to just do this like a few times just to show you like the different ways of doing it. Okay, we're going to delete that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control and look. Notice where the time, the current time in the CTI is, right? I'm going to press Control and slash, and you'll notice that it actually appears all the way back here, even though the time indicator was there. You can actually change that. If you press Control Alt and semicolon, what you can do is, you see where it says Create Layers at Composition Start Time. You can actually get rid of that. So now if we get rid of that, and then we're going to try the same thing again. Control slash, and you see that like it actually starts it there. So you can, so that's a different way that you could actually choose where you want the composition to start. Because otherwise, if you don't do it like that, what you would have to do is you would have to, if that is still on, you would actually have to like put this in manually where you want it, right? So you choose this time. I want it to start at 4 seconds, and now it's starting at 4 seconds. So another thing you can do is, we've got this composition plant selected here. If I wanted to add it directly to composition, I could just drag it up and put it directly into the composition like that. And that will have the same effect as doing Control slash. If we just drag this buttercup, and we're going to drag it over this button, and you'll notice that it allows you to do that. And what will happen is, you can see we've got the composition there now. So we can click there, and we can access both the composition and the layer, and the layer itself. If there are multiple layers, we'll be able to access those just simply by clicking on the different layers in the timeline. And we can close these boxes by pressing Control W. So we can close that layer. Control W, see it goes to none. We can open that again, and instead we can close the composition, Control W, and you can see it goes to none. So that's one way of doing it. Okay, so the second method of doing it is if we can actually take two images. So we've got the buttercup and this Drosera here. So you can see they're different sizes, the images. So what we're going to do is we're going to shift them, and then we're going to drag them over to the button here. And you'll notice here we get new composition from selection. Initially we've got the value single composition is selected, and I believe the duration, you can change that to whatever you like. I think it defers to the previous time you've done this, but that duration is fine. And what we can do is use the dimensions, and you can see this is actually a larger image, the Drosera. So if we use that image, we can press OK, and you can see we're going to get one comp with multiple layers here. So it's going to put them all, and this is actually the size of the comp, the Drosera. The buttercup itself is going to be smaller than the size of the comp. We can verify that by going to the composition settings, and you can see that the width and the height is exactly the same as the image. Okay, if you go to Window and then you go to Render Queue, you can see you can get this button here. You're going to get this panel over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to just highlight all of our images here, and we're going to drag them over into the render queue. And look what happens in the project window. You'll see that as soon as I drag them into the render queue, an individual comp was made for each of the items there. So you can see we have our ravine, we have our buttercup, and you'll see as I select each of the comps, they're actually loading onto the timeline. So we can do 3, we can do 4, and this arrow is now active, so we can access the various different comps by clicking on them. And again, we can access the layer information in that way as well. Now let's try pressing Control, Alt, Shift, and N, and you'll see what will happen here. Let's just get rid of the render queue. Is we're going to get two different comps. Now the right one is locked, so you can see it's already locked. And the left one here, we can still switch between all the different things. And you'll notice that when we click on this, we'll be able to switch between each of the different compositions in anywhere we want. But here you can see only one is allowed. So that's just a little shortcut if you want to be able to compare two different comps side by side. Control Y, see what happens, and we get this menu called Solid Settings. You always have to make this solid. You have to be in a comp. So we're in this plants one that you've seen before. Let's do it at this size for now. And you can see there's various settings here. And choose pixels. And you can obviously choose the color. Let's do a slightly darker blue maybe. And we'll press OK. So that's going to create our image there. And you can see we've got our layer deep purple solid. Okay. And what we could do is we could press Control D and we can get multiple of those. And you'll notice that we've got our solids folder now, which has got one item in it. So all these are stored within here. It says used 3 times, right? Okay, so now if I press Control Shift Y, we can go to the solid settings. And you'll notice that because we've already got the solid now, is we've got this box selected. It affects all layers that use this solid. This change will affect 3 layers. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press this I button just so you can see that like we're going to use a different one. So obviously if we did this and this and this, they will disappear. So we'll just select this bottom one and Control Shift Y. And so if we change this now to a different color, so here, you can already see actually it's actually updating in real time. You can see how they're all changing. And they're actually getting the correct colors as well as we move between the various different shades of cyan there, for instance. So we could change them all, and then they're all going to change like that to cyan. So the other thing we could do, and also just to point out as well, is if we change this to 720, you can see each of these layers, whichever one we take a look at, is going to be that size, right? So that's another way of looking at it. Let's just go back into that though again. You do need to have a layer selected before pressing Control Shift Y. So let's revert that back to 2160. And so the other thing we can do is to press this button, affect all the layers that use this solid. We can uncheck that, right? So it says a new solid will be created, and you saw that it created Deep Solid 2. And this layer is now called Deep Cyan Solid 2. Right, so if I now change this, some sort of, a few different things with this, we could turn this to a medium blue. And then that will work like that. And what I've done here is I've changed the frame rate to 30 frames per second, just because it makes the numbers a bit cleaner here. So we have this bar. So if we can see like literally how many frames. So if we do that, for instance, you can see that to get to 1 second, we're going to need to go 30 frames, right? So it basically goes 0:29, then 1 second. So what we can do is let's just go back out again, get to see the whole thing. We're going to put the CTI over here, and then we're going to press the home button. And what that does is it's going to put the CTI back at the beginning of the clip. Now we're going to press the end button, and that's going to put it at the end of the clip. Okay, let's zoom back in again, and we're going to show a few more. So I would like to just have this is a good way to show this one, right? So if we want to go forward a frame, we're going to need to press page down. So let's say, so you can see I press that 10 times and we get to 10 frames. If I now press shift and page down, you can see we're going to increment by 10 frames each time. And similarly, if we go page up, we're going to go back a frame, shift and page up, we're going to go back 10 frames. Okay, so now we focused on navigation, now I want to focus on zooming. So the way to do it is simply to use the equals and the minus keys to zoom in and out. So press equals, you can see I can zoom in, and then we press minus, we can zoom out. But if you'll notice one thing though, like here I am, say on like the 2 second mark here. If I press equals to zoom in, you'll notice that there's the 2, it's to the left now. It's actually not where I would like it to be. I'd probably want that to be more central, right? So that I actually can work around that area. So let's choose a different time. I'm going to do 9 seconds now, around 9 seconds. What I'm going to do is press equals and then D, equals then D, equals then D. And you'll see now that I'm much more zoomed in. You can see this is the area I'm zoomed into here. But the advantage is that the 9 seconds is actually much closer to where I want it to be. And so I would be able to navigate from, say, from 8 and 10 there to 9 and 15 on the other side. So that is one way to do it, to press the letter D after you press either equals or minus. Okay, so you'll notice on the timeline we have two things. So this one, you may have noticed, if we wanted to, for instance, focus on just, say, the first second, we could do something like that, and then we got the first second ready to edit. And then we can drag it all the way to the end, and then that gives us the whole thing. But there is actually another bar here, and it's actually on this level here, and it's called the time ruler, as you can see there. And what this time ruler lets you do is it lets you set the work area. So that's the area that you're currently going to work on in your composition. So the best way we need to start the beginning and end points. So what we're going to do is say we want to start at 2 seconds and end at 8 seconds. So we'll put the CTI at 2 seconds, and we're going to press B, and then we're going to put the CTI at 8 seconds, and we're going to press N. So I just, for some reason, there's a biscuit called BN, and it's also in French. But that's probably a good way to remember the shortcuts for that one. Just like that, literally, that's the first thing I thought of. So what we can then do is if we then press, we can use the home and end keys again. Shift and home gives us the beginning of that work area, and shift and end will be the end of that work area. And if we wanted to reset to the length of the clip here, all we need to do is just double click on it and it would reset. You'll also notice there is actually some additional info in the info panel. So you can see the work area duration is being changed there. So if I wanted to get it exact, it would actually be possible. Let's get that frame. So that would be a good way to get an exact figure. Okay, let's look at this button now. So this one lets you turn on the action safe and title areas. So what this does is it will, when you go to render it, if you wanted to not render the outside edge of your clip, you could actually see where those areas, and I believe it's 5 and 10% in, and all you have to do is press Alt and click, and you see now it's on, Alt click, and it's off. So just another interesting tip is that if we do Control Alt semicolon, we get the preferences button, and Control Alt apostrophe, or the @ symbol, depending on what your keyboard looks like, gives you the keyboard shortcuts. So one thing we can also do is Control apostrophe, and that's going to turn the grid on. You'll notice, unfortunately, just so happens that the grid is green, which is not at all suited for this particular image. So we're going to do Control. So we're going to do Control Alt semicolon, and I wanted to go into this section with the grids, and you see the grid color is green, which is not really appropriate. So we'll do something which is going to show up a little bit better. Okay, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to change the color to black, and we're going to do grid line every 500 pixels. That's fine. So here you can see this is what it looks like every 500 pixels. So that's going to be really useful to manipulate images and objects on that. Subdivisions is 4. We're going to change that to you can change that to 10. Okay, so you can see the large box remains the same size, but it's divided into equal blocks. So I think they would be 50 pixels square, right? Well, that would be the width and the height would be that. Okay. Okay, so the other grid is the proportional grid. We've got horizontal 6, vertical 8. Let's take a look at that. So you can see this makes it a lot. It actually looks like it may be more useful in terms of it helps you to see the overall size of what you're dealing with. I don't believe you can use the action safe areas at the same time now. So the reason why these two are in their box. And you can also press, I think it's Alt with apostrophe, and that will toggle it on and off as well. Okay, so we have rulers as well, and we could, if we wanted to, have rulers with a grid. So we can do, remember, Control apostrophe will turn the grid on and off, and Alt apostrophe will turn the proportional grid on and off, which are both viewable while the rulers are there. Okay, so with rulers we can drag out from here. So if we wanted to, for instance, we can drag a guide here. And then if we go to view, we can also lock guides there. So that'll give us another way to see. And you'll see the guide position there is 2270. And from there we can also turn off the rulers. So you can see we can leave the guides in place once we've put them in where we need them. You know, perhaps turn off the proportional grid as well if we wanted to, for whatever reason, have this specific area. And there's also a snapping to guides, which is obviously very useful for objects. So I just created a new composition and we've drawn a little shape there. So you notice the anchor point is in the wrong place. So we need to press Y, and then that will let us just put the anchor point somewhere a bit more appropriate. Okay, so now we've got what we want to do. We can put our position in here. So there's our position, and then at 1 second we'll do another position, put the position over here, and then at 2 seconds we'll put the position over here. So what you can also do is you can actually change these keyframes wherever you want. So I can put this one here, for instance, and then you can see it's going to go much faster. Now this curve is known as an auto Bezier curve. The reason for that is because if you just look, you see this keyframe in the middle, right? This line going between the 2 points, that's always going to be parallel to the line going between these 2 points. If I move it into a completely different place, you can see this line here completely parallel to this line here, and that's what makes it an automatic Bezier. So it doesn't matter where I move the keyframes around, that's always going to be, that is an automatic Bezier. And just a couple of things as well that just to point out is that if you can't see when you do video playback, if you can't see the motion path, you do have to press this button. There used to be a button. Sometimes if you're changing stuff, it might not update here. And that might be because there used to be a button on the timeline called Live Update. And that button is now here. It's not actually on the timeline. There's not a little button for it. So we could convert this now into a continuous Bezier. So what we can do is we select the middle keyframe here. And what we're going to do is we're going to just drag that. And you can see this is now a straight line. So it doesn't matter how I drag this. You know, I could even do something like that. You can see now it says continuous Bezier. We can also hold down the G key and then press on the button there, and that will turn it into a linear keyframe. Then we can hold down the G key again, and it will turn it back to an auto Bezier. So you can see there it is, back to a continuous Bezier. Let's hold down the G key. And now it's just a regular Bezier keyframe. Okay, we're going to hold down the G key. Click that, it's going to turn it into an auto Bezier. Drag any one of the handles. Turns it into continuous Bezier. Hold down the G key. Drag one of these 2 points. Let go, and now it's a Bezier keyframe. Okay, another thing we can do is we can hold down the G key, and when we get a little plus point on there, we can actually just press that, and you can see it's going to create a new keyframe in that spot. So similarly, we could hold down Z to switch to zoom. We could zoom into an area and then let go of Z, and it will revert back to the selection tool. Okay, so now I want to look at crossfading. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and crossfade. We've got one clip here. And in general, what you want to do is you want to do something called fade up. So, for instance, say we want this bird thing to appear after. So we've got this, and we're going to want to fade up into this, right? So all you'd have to do is just put the opacity keyframe here, put it at 0, and then at some point here, we could put another opacity keyframe at 100. So that would be generally how you're going to want to fade up. So you can see it's going to go along here and fade into that. All right, let's go back to what I was actually working on yesterday, because this is going to show things a little bit clearer. So one thing you may notice, just to talk a little bit more about the keyframes. So we click on positioning and see you can highlight all the different keyframes. What this means is because they're all selected, it means if we change any of these values in the position, you can see we can actually move all the keyframes are changing simultaneously. We can also press J and K to move between the different keyframes. But keep in mind, right, if we select this keyframe, for instance, so say we deselect and we select this keyframe, if I change this value, it's not actually going to change the value of this keyframe. You can see it's the first keyframe which is changing, because that's where the one that's actually currently selected. So you can't just select another one and change the keyframe. You can see it automatically goes back to the other one. And you'll also notice where the timeline head is. It will only actually, that dot over here will only fill in. We can also, by the way, if you press U on a layer like this, you can actually see things that are actually changed. So obviously I changed if you watched yesterday's video, you'll know that I changed the anchor point. I can also look at some values here as well. Like if you look here, go to edit value, you can actually change the units, do percentage of composition. And interestingly as well, in the shape layer, if we go to U, this one in edit value has got percentage of source. So scaling is pretty cool. If you press S, we can see the scale menu. And what you can do is you can scale, and you can see there's that little chain link. And you can see if I go into negative values, we're going to go upside down. Now, what if we want to set this back to default, what it started as? We can just double click here. That will set it to default. What if we wanted to make it so this is a 720p video, but the composition size is 1080? So that's also fairly simple. Just press Control, Alt, and F, and that will set it to the correct size there. So you can also press this button here, and then that's going to let you scale in the X and Y independently. If we then press Alt, and then we press the chain button here, you can see it's going to constrain the proportions back to what it was before, and we can reset. You can see you can also move it around in the composition panel. If I press Shift though, you'll notice now it's constrained. So I can also move it around here, and you'll notice that I've got the constrain lock off. Now I'm going to press the Shift button, and you'll see it actually constrained to that exact size. And then I keep Shift held, and then I let go of the mouse button, and that will let it constrain to that particular size. There's also a couple of other options. If we use the numpad and we press Control and plus, you can see I can do it by 1% increments. You can see the delta value here is 1%. So I can press Control minus. So you can see if I hold down the minus key, it won't render it quite immediately. We also can do Control Shift, and then again using numpad keys, it's going to do 10% increments instead. Okay, so now I want to look at this particular shape, and I wanted to talk about seamless animation. So to really illustrate an animation, probably need to do a rotation. You can see I've got scale already out here. If you wanted to get any other values, you see if I press P, I'll get position out, and if I press S, I'll get scale out. But if you wanted to have both out at the same time, you need to add in the Shift key. So if I press Shift and P, I'm also going to get Shift position, and I can do Shift P again, and that will remove it but leave the scale. Now let's try the R, which is going to be rotation. So there's different ways that you could potentially rotate this. So if I hold down the W key, you'll notice that here the rotation is selected. I could then do a rotation, and then when I let go, it will revert back to the selection tool. If I wanted to rotate the shape, I could also do Shift and plus. So that's going to do it in 10 increments. So we're going to change this composition to 2 seconds, and I wanted to go through a full rotation. So if we go to 1 second, so I want to, okay, so we'll have here we're going to do on that, and then at 1, as you might imagine, we'll just put in the number here to 180, right? So the issue with the seamless stuff, it comes here, right? If I put this back to 0, there is a problem, right? And that problem is right here, it's stopping at basically 1 second, 29 frames. And so when it loops, there's actually going to be 2 frames that are the same. So that is a problem in all animation. So what you need to do is press end. So if I was somewhere here, I could press end, and I'd go to the final frame. But what I could do is, because it's actually 2 seconds long, if I then press page down, you see I'm actually able to get to another. It doesn't show in the comp view anymore. So, but you see I can still put a keyframe in there. So if I then just put this one as 0, and I just remove this one, so you can see this frame is outside the range. So it's not actually going to play, but it knows that this point is 6. So when it loops, it's going to work perfectly, right? Because you can see it's going through 6 increments of 6 each time. So it's going to do 6 on the final frame, and then the first frame of the loop will be 0. It's kind of hard to see, like, but you can see that it just looks smoother. I think if you slowed down the video of what I just showed, you probably would be able to see the difference. But that gives you a much smoother animation and seamless animation even. So we've just got a regular shape, and we're going to turn on the 3D layer. And we're going to press R, and now we can see the rotation. So typically when we look at rotation, there's like we move around. When we're moving in 2D, we're moving in Z, right? So this is X, this is Y, and the blue one is Z. So you always have to think of it like that the Z, you always have to think of the plane that you're messing with is the one which is perpendicular to the one. So if we look at the actual stage, and imagine the stage is a 2D sort of area, we know that if we move the Z number, so for instance, if I change this Z number, and then we're going to change that to like 100, right? You can see, so you can see if I change the Z number there, it just moves around. And this is in the flat area here. So the reason for that is because the Z here, the plane that is perpendicular is basically the screen, the 2D screen. So if we want to move in 3D space, we need to think about changing the X and the Y numbers. So let's just try changing the X and the Y numbers instead. So you can see if we do the X rotation, what this is basically saying is here's the X, right? So the plane that's perpendicular is going to be like this up and down backwards, right? So we can sort of see what's happening there. That's exactly what's happening, right? It's going up and down backwards in space. Now similarly, if we did it with the Y rotation, here's Y, right? So it's going to be the plane that's perpendicular to this line. It's going to be the left and right. So you can see that's going left to right in 3D space. Typically what you want to do with stuff, you just want to use this one, which is the orientation one. So we can just do this, and then we'll say put this at 300, 300, 300, and then over here we'll do another back to 0 again. Okay, so I put the easing on as well, right? So what you can see, right, is that what it does is it uses this thing called quaternion interpolation. So even though it's at 300, like if it's actually only going to travel 60, so it's only going to travel. So when it gets here, it gets to 300, and then it's just going to go back to 360. You see, if I did it the other way around, and we did that there, and then we put this at 300, you'll notice it's going to go all the way, so it's going to look way jankier. So you see, it could, to get to 0, it could just go up to 60 here, but it doesn't. That's why in general you want to use the orientation values. If I just put a blur on the shape layer, that will actually help. So you can see if I just put like a blur in there instead, you can see that's going to do a much better effect. Yeah, so if I made it like a bit more of a reasonable time, we could just pull these keyframes down a bit. Put this one here instead. So you can see, for instance, if I made it a little bit longer, you can see it's going to have like a better visual effect. We've got this button here called Enable Auto Keyframe. So if I wanted to enable a keyframe, all I could do is I could move this into a different position, and you see the keyframe is automatically created. So then if we go over here, for instance, move it somewhere else, it's going to automatically animate. So you don't actually need to click on the little clock thing there. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about the anchor point here. So the anchor point is kind of a cool thing because, and it's best to see it, like the anchor point moves with regards to the layer. So if we get into this position where we've got the layer, you can use a shortcut Control Shift Alt and N to get here. What you can see is, if we take a look at both the position and the anchor point here, you'll see when I move the anchor point in the layer, it's not changing the position. So you can see that wherever I move the anchor point, it's sort of like in the opposite place. So if I move the anchor point to the top left-hand corner, then that's where it's going to register the top left-hand corner of the image. If we go to the bottom right, you can see that's going to be the bottom right there. Top right is on the bottom left. So it's sort of like the opposite, wherever you put it. Okay, now you can also, of course, use the pan behind tool, and that will let you move. You can see you can move both of these things at the same time. So if I just move this to 960, 1080, I'm going to have it in the perfect spot, right? Okay, so one thing you can do is you can actually create animation without doing like motion stuff. And the way to do that is simply to have, look at the scale keyframe. So, for instance, let's turn auto keyframe back on. And we're just going to set this scale to 0 here. And then over here, we're going to just set it to 100. You can see that already creates an animation. What we could do is we could unlock this as well, and then we could set this to 0. And then we could set this one to 100. Let's take a look at what that does. You can see that's actually going to create more dynamic effect. This is actually kind of like a cooler effect probably if you just change one axis like that. So one way to look at the orbit is we could position this in the center, and then all we could do is we could just do a full rotation. So if we did a full rotation, it will go all the way around, right? So we just start on here. We'll do a rotation here at 0. Goes to the end, we'll page down. And we're going to put this -1. So there's the keyframe. So you can see I haven't exactly lined it up, but you can see the idea, right? So this is a way that you can get like an orbiting object. Let's look at some of these things. Layer. So we can do layer transform. Let's try flipping this vertically, see what happens. So you can see now it's on the other side. Now there's actually different ways that you could do a flip. So if you look here in the effects and presets, so you can see it's currently going counterclockwise. If I wanted to change that, I could change this number to 1. So look at that. Now you can see it's going clockwise.